Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're doing well today, wherever you're listening from. Before we begin, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine being 63 years old, standing on the sidewalk with two suitcases beside your feet, staring at the front door of the house you paid for, the house you raised your child in, the house that still carried the sound of your late husband's footsteps in the hallway. And the person who put you there was your own daughter. My name is Teresa Thornwick, and for most of my life, I believed quiet sacrifice was the same thing as love. I believed if you gave enough, forgave enough, and stayed gentle enough, family would eventually understand what you had done for them. I was wrong. My daughter, Jesseline, looked me in the eyes one morning and said, "It's time you learned your place." Then she and her husband tried to throw me out of my own home. They thought I would break. They thought I would beg. They thought I was just an aging widow with a small pension, a house too old to maintain, and no one left to stand beside me. But what they didn't know was that inside my handbag, folded carefully in my cardigan pocket, was a lottery letter worth more money than they could imagine. And that same day, while they were planning my disappearance, I became a millionaire. I had lived in that old Victorian house in Port Harville for 37 years. It sat on a sloping street near the harbor, close enough to the lighthouse that on foggy mornings, the horn rolled through the neighborhood like a warning from another life. The floors creaked in familiar places. The windows rattled in winter storms. The dining room still smelled faintly of beeswax and old wood, no matter how many times I cleaned it. That house was not just property to me. It was proof I had survived. My husband, Michael, had died when Jesseline was 9. He left behind grief, medical bills, and a little girl who still needed lunch packed, shoes tied, school forms signed, and bedtime stories read in a voice that did not crack. I did what mothers do. I kept going. Before motherhood swallowed most of my days, I had been a botanical illustrator. I painted coastal plants, marsh orchids, dune grasses, wildflowers that grew stubbornly in salt air and poor soil. My work had appeared in the Coastal Flora Encyclopedia, and for a while, people in academic circles knew my name. But life has a way of narrowing around necessity. I took smaller jobs. I paid the mortgage. I stretched checks until they screamed. I painted late at night at the kitchen table while Jesseline slept upstairs, because beauty was the only thing I could still claim that did not cost money. Every room in that house had my hands in it. The roof repairs, the garden beds, the wallpaper I stripped myself, the upstairs study where I once dreamed of painting full-time again. And then, 6 months before everything fell apart, Jesseline and her husband, Rafferty, moved in. They said it was temporary. Rafferty's investment firm had collapsed. Jesseline said they only needed a little time to rebuild. I opened my door because she was my daughter, and because a mother's first instinct is almost always to make room. At first, I told myself the little things did not matter. Rafferty moved boxes into my study and called it his office. Jesseline rearranged my kitchen because, as she put it, "Mom, this system makes more sense." They hosted people in my dining room without asking. They rolled their eyes at my lace curtains. They made comments about the old rugs, the faded wallpaper, the botanical paintings. "Charming," Rafferty once said, looking around my living room. "In a historical museum sort of way." Jesseline laughed. I smiled because that was what I had trained myself to do. Then came the morning the letter arrived. It was tucked between grocery flyers, the electric bill, and the weekly church bulletin. A small envelope from the Port Harville Lottery Commission. I almost threw it away. Months earlier, on my birthday, I had bought one ticket at the pharmacy after picking up my prescription. It had been a silly little gift to myself. I opened the envelope over the kitchen counter, expecting nothing. Then I read the number. $14,700,000. After taxes, a little under $9 million. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. The kitchen clock ticked above the pantry door. Outside, gulls cried over the harbor. Somewhere upstairs, Rafferty's heavy footsteps crossed the floor of the study he had taken from me. I read the letter again. Then again. It was real. That money was not just money. It was heat in winter. It was paid taxes. It was a roof that could be repaired without choosing between groceries and dignity. It was the end of lying awake at night doing math in the dark. I folded the letter and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. I was not ready to tell them. At first, foolishly, I imagined joy. I imagined cooking dinner that night, lighting candles, and telling Jessalyn I could finally fix the back porch, restore the studio, maybe even help them get back on their feet in a way that did not cost me my peace. That's how deeply I still wanted to believe in my daughter. I reached for my coat, intending to go to West Home and claim the winnings. That was when Jessalyn stepped into the doorway. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk." Rafferty appeared behind her with a coffee mug in his hand and that polite smile of his, the kind that never touched his eyes. "Teresa," he said, "because he never called me Mom. You've been very generous letting us stay here." Something in my stomach tightened. "This is my home," I said carefully. "You're both welcome here." Jessalyn walked to the dining table and sat down with the calm, professional posture she used as admissions director at Thornfield Academy. She folded her hands like she was about to discuss tuition policies instead of my life. "That's exactly the issue," she said. I did not sit down. "What issue?" She looked at Rafferty, then back at me. "Raf and I have been thinking. This house is too much for you now. The stairs, the upkeep, the taxes. And honestly, if we're going to start a family, we need stability." I stared at her. "Stability?" Rafferty stepped in. "We think it makes sense for us to take over the house." For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard. "Take over?" Jessalyn sighed, already tired of my resistance before I had even offered any. "Mom, don't make this dramatic. You'd be happier somewhere easier. Serenity Gardens has lovely rooms. We already spoke with them." My hands went cold. "You spoke with a retirement community?" "They're holding a room until tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow?" Rafferty set his mug down. "The movers can help pack. We'll handle the paperwork. You sign the house over, we renovate, and everyone moves forward." I looked at my daughter, the girl I had once carried through fevers, school concerts, heartbreaks, and college applications. "You want me to sign over my house?" "Our house," she said sharply. "It was my childhood home. It is legally mine." Her face hardened. "There it is. Always about what you sacrificed. Always about what you paid for. Do you know what it was like growing up with that hanging over me?" I felt the words hit, one by one. "I never held that over you." "You didn't have to," she snapped. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every time anything came up, you made sure I knew you gave up your career to raise me." That was not true. But lies spoken by someone you love can still wound before your mind has time to defend itself. Rafferty leaned forward. "Jessalyn has a reputation to uphold. This house has potential, but not like this. Not with old curtains, faded watercolors, and you wandering around like the whole place is a shrine to your past." I touched the pocket where the lottery letter rested. I could have pulled it out. I could have watched their faces change. But something stopped me. Because if money was the only thing that would make them respect me, then I needed to know who they were before they knew what I had. So I said, "I'm going out. We'll talk later." Jessalyn stood. "Mom, we are talking now." "No," I said. "You are making arrangements for my life without my permission." The doorbell rang. Jessalyn opened it, and in walked Octavia Harcourt, her old college friend and a board member at Thornfield Academy. Octavia wore a cream coat, pearl earrings, and the kind of concern wealthy women put on when they want cruelty to look like compassion. "Teresa," she said softly, "Jessalyn told me you're facing a difficult transition." I looked from Octavia to my daughter. "What did you tell her?" Octavia answered before Jessalyn could. that you've been struggling with the house and that you agreed it may be time for a safer place. There it was. They had already started telling people this was my choice. They were not just trying to move me. They were trying to rewrite me. I picked up my handbag. I need air. Jesseline's eyes flashed. Don't embarrass yourself. I looked at her then, really looked at her. The polished hair, the tight mouth, the impatience. For the first time, I saw not my little girl, but a grown woman who had mistaken my gentleness for weakness. I'm not the one doing that, I said. Then I walked out. The harbor air slapped my face cold and damp. I walked until I reached the old lighthouse, then called a cab to West Home. By late afternoon, I was seated across from Lana Creswell at Pinnacle Tower, signing documents that transferred $8,900,000 into a trust in my name. Lana explained tax schedules, payout structures, and privacy protections. When she handed me a temporary debit card with a $250,000 advance already available, I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. Can my identity remain private? I asked. Yes, she said. Port Harville allows lottery winners to stay anonymous. I closed my eyes and breathed. That mattered. Because I knew now that money in the wrong hands becomes a weapon, and I was not going to hand my daughter the blade. Before going home, I stopped at the office of Valencia Moretti, one of the most respected attorneys in Port Harville. I told her everything. The house, the retirement room, the lies, Octavia, the movers, the lottery. Valencia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and said, Teresa, you need legal protection immediately. Not tomorrow. Today. She confirmed what I already knew but still needed to hear. The house was mine. Jesselyn had no ownership claim. Rafferty had no authority. And if they tried to force me out, we could fight them. When I returned home that evening, I found 3 strangers in my living room with clipboards and measuring tapes. One was studying my fireplace. Another was inspecting the windows. Jesselyn turned from the mantel. Oh, you're back. Who are these people? The design team from Harrow Interiors, she said. They're preparing renovation estimates. In my house? Rafferty smiled. Teresa, we already discussed this. No, I said. You discussed it. I did not agree. Jesseline's cheeks flushed. Mom, please don't do this in front of people. I looked around the room, at strangers judging the walls where my life had unfolded. The fireplace where Jesseline hung stockings as a child. The windows I had painted beside. The floorboards Michael once promised to refinish before illness stole his strength. Something in me became very still. Out, I said. The designers froze. Jesseline hissed. Mom, I'm not talking to them, I said. I'm talking to you and Rafferty. Get out of my house. Rafferty laughed once. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious. Jesseline's face changed. The daughter disappeared. Something colder stepped forward. You'll regret this, she said. You can't afford this place without us. With what? Rafferty added. That little pension from the Botanical Society? I almost smiled. Almost. But I kept the lottery secret tucked safely against my heart. I'll manage, I said. Jesselyn lifted her chin. If you force this, we'll sue. Dad left part of this house to me. No, I said. He didn't. We'll see. Speak to my lawyer, I said. That was the first time fear flickered across her face. Not much. Just enough. Rafferty muttered that this wasn't over, and the designers left quickly, embarrassed by the scene they had stepped into. That night, the house felt different. Not safe. Not mine in the way it had been before. More like a place under occupation. I called Valencia again. They claim Jesselyn has inheritance rights, I told her. She doesn't, Valencia said immediately. I checked the records, but because they've lived there for 6 months, we may need formal eviction procedures. I'll prepare notice. How long? 30 days if they resist. 30 days. 30 days with two people who had already tried to erase me. Valencia's voice softened. Pack anything irreplaceable. Documents, jewelry, photographs, original artwork. And Teresa, consider staying somewhere else for now. Leaving felt like defeat. Then, I heard Rafferty's footsteps outside the den. He came in without knocking. "You're making a mistake," he said. I turned slowly. "No, I made the mistake 6 months ago when I let you move in." His jaw tightened. Jessalyn deserves that house. Jessalyn deserves a husband who doesn't encourage her to steal from her mother. His eyes went flat. "You know what your problem is. You got lucky once with some little art book, and you've been living off that story ever since." His words did not crush me the way he hoped. They clarified him. I said, "Good night, Rafferty." He stepped closer. "If you stay here, Teresa, life is going to get very uncomfortable." It was not a direct threat. It was worse in some ways. Soft enough to deny, clear enough to understand. I looked at him and said, "This conversation is over." He leaned back, surprised by my calm. As I climbed the stairs, he called after me, "This isn't over." I answered without turning around. "I know, it's just beginning." Now guys, if you're listening to this and you've ever watched someone use the word family as a way to control you, you already understand what Teresa was facing in this moment. And if this story has pulled you in so far, please take 1 second to subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring you more emotional, real-life-style stories like this. And tell me in the comments, do you think Teresa should have revealed the lottery money right away, or was she right to keep it hidden? The next morning, I came downstairs in a blue blouse, tailored slacks, and my best boots. I needed to look steady, even if my hands still shook. Jessalyn sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open. I poured coffee. Then I noticed the walls. Several of my botanical illustrations were gone. "Where are my paintings?" I asked. Jessalyn barely looked up. "We packed them." A cold wave moved through me. "You what?" "You refused to cooperate, so we started without you." Those paintings were not decorations. They were originals, my life's work. Some had been requested by museums, some had been cited by researchers. All of them carried years of my eyes, my hands, my patience. "Where are they?" "In storage," she said. "Relax." "Which storage facility?" She rolled her eyes. "They're botanical drawings, Mom. Nobody cares about old sketches of weeds." Something inside me split cleanly open. I picked up my phone. Jessalyn looked at me sharply. "What are you doing?" "Calling the police." Her chair scraped back. "You wouldn't dare." I looked directly at her and spoke into the phone. "Yes, I'd like to report stolen property. My name is Teresa Thornwick. My daughter and son-in-law removed valuable artwork from my home without permission." Jessalyn's face moved from shock to rage to calculation. 10 minutes later, Rafferty burst through the front door. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Protecting my property. They're drawings. They are mine." Jessalyn finally snapped. "They're at Port Harville Storage, Harbor Road, Unit 217. There. Are you happy?" "No," I said, "but I'm done being quiet." The officers who arrived were calm and professional. They took statements. They documented the removal. Because it was a family matter, they warned me criminal charges could be complicated, but the record was now official. That mattered. Paperwork is not dramatic. But in the real world, paperwork is power. After the officers left, I packed 2 suitcases. Clothes, important documents, family photographs, jewelry from Michael, sketchbooks, the lottery papers, the trust documents, everything I could not risk losing. Jessalyn appeared in the doorway. You're really leaving? Temporarily. So now you're abandoning us? I stopped zipping the suitcase and looked at her. You tried to move me into a retirement facility and take my house. We were helping you. No, I said. You were helping yourself and calling it concern. Her eyes narrowed. You're throwing your own daughter out? Yes. Where are we supposed to go? Raf lost his job. That became your problem when you decided I no longer mattered. She stared at me like I had slapped her. Then she said the line I will never forget. It's time you learned your place. I lifted the suitcase. I just did, I said. It isn't under your control. Valencia pulled up outside a few minutes later. I walked down the front steps, with the suitcases bumping behind me, the sea wind sharp on my face. Behind me, Rafferty was shouting at Jesseline. Their plan was no longer smooth. That was the first comfort I had felt all day. The Crimson Tide Hotel stood near the harbor with a marble lobby, tall windows, and a chandelier that looked like frozen water. I walked in wearing practical shoes and a tired face, feeling like an imposter in my own future. The receptionist smiled. How may I help you? I need a room for 2 weeks, I said. We have a standard king. I hesitated. Do you have anything overlooking the harbor? She checked. A harbor view suite. I'll take it. When the temporary debit card cleared without issue, something shifted in me. 20 minutes later, I stood in a suite, larger than my kitchen and dining room combined. The lighthouse was visible through mist. The bed was turned down with crisp white sheets. A basket of fruit sat on the table like a prop from someone else's life. I sat down and cried. Not because I was weak, because I was finally safe enough to feel what had happened. My daughter had tried to erase me from my own life, but I had survived the first attempt. The next days moved quickly. Valencia served the eviction notice. Rafferty raged. Jesselyn cried. Neither reaction changed the law. I met with a financial advisor named Zachary Pittman, who explained investments, taxes, trusts, and how not to become one of those lottery winners who lose everything in 5 years. You've lived carefully your whole life, he told me. That may save you. Then he smiled. But don't forget to allow yourself some joy. Joy. The word felt strange. For decades, I had allowed myself responsibility, duty, careful choices, quiet endurance. Joy had become something I admired in other people. On my way back to the hotel, I passed Blackburn Auction House. A sign in the window announced a maritime collection auction. I went inside on impulse. That single choice changed the shape of everything that followed. A woman named Imogen greeted me. She was elegant, observant, and not easily impressed. She handed me a catalog. I turned the pages until I reached a set of 19th century nautical charts of the Port Harville coastline, annotated by Captain Elias Winthrop. In the margins, he had written notes about coastal plants, some of them species I had studied and painted decades later. My breath caught. They're beautiful, I said. Imogen smiled. Quite special. Winthrop was a navigator, but also something of an amateur botanist. I told her my name. Recognition moved through her face. Teresa Thornwick? The botanical illustrator? For the first time in years, someone said my name like it mattered for something other than being someone's mother. I know your marsh orchid plates, she said. They're extraordinary. I did not know what to say. Compliments can feel almost painful when you have gone too long without being seen. Imogen invited me to a private preview the next evening. That meant I needed something to wear. So I went to a boutique on Harbor Road called Elysia. The owner, Vivian, studied me for half a minute and said, "You've been dressing like someone trying not to be noticed." I laughed because it was true. She put me in a deep teal silk dress, a cashmere shawl, and shoes that were somehow elegant and comfortable. When I stepped in front of the mirror, I did not look younger. I looked present. Vivian smiled. There you are. The next evening, I walked into Blackburn's wearing that dress, and felt the room notice me, not with pity, but with interest. Imogen introduced me to collectors, professors, donors, and artists. To my astonishment, several already knew my work. One man told me my paintings had changed the way he saw the salt marsh outside town. A young photographer said my illustrations had more life than any digital image. Every conversation returned a piece of me I thought had been lost. Then Jesseline walked in with Octavia. She saw me and stopped. Her face changed so quickly I almost missed it. Shock. Disbelief. Panic. "Mom," she said too loudly when she reached me. "What a surprise." "Yes," I said. "I imagine it is." Octavia put on her softest voice. "Teresa, Jesseline has been so worried. No one knew where you were." "How kind," I said. "Funny thing, though, no one called." Jesseline's mouth tightened. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited." "By who?" "By me," Imogen said, appearing beside me. "Mrs. Thornwick is an exceptional artist." Jesseline blinked, as if the sentence were in a language she didn't understand. Octavia recovered faster. "We're only concerned because Teresa has made some unusual decisions lately." There it was again. Concern as a weapon. Imogen's voice cooled. "She seems perfectly clear to me." Jesseline grabbed my wrist. "Mom, you're embarrassing yourself." I pulled my hand away. "No," I said calmly. "I'm enjoying an evening I was invited to attend." Then I turned back to the display. It was a small moment. But small moments are sometimes where freedom begins. 2 days later, I attended the auction. The bidding for the Winthrop charts rose fast. 5,000, 15, 40, 60, 95. My heart hammered. 100,000, I said. The representative from the Maritime Museum lowered his paddle. The gavel came down. Sold. I had just spent $100,000 on antique nautical charts. A month earlier, I would have thought such a thing was madness. But that day, it felt like reclamation. Afterward, Dr. Harrison Wilford, from the Maritime Museum, approached me. He had hoped the museum would acquire the charts, but instead of resentment, he offered collaboration. "Would you consider loaning them for display?" he asked. That conversation grew into something larger. A museum loan, a botanical exhibit, a possible new series of my work pairing modern coastal flora with Winthrop's historical notes. For the first time in years, I had a future that was not just about surviving. Then came the property. A broker named Thaddeus Quinn told me about an old lighthouse keeper's cottage on Lighthouse Point. It had a stone exterior, a glass addition, a private path to a small cove, and a former keeper's office converted into a studio with perfect north light. The price was $3,200,000. Once, that number would have ended the conversation. Now, it began a question. Not, can I afford this? But, will I allow myself to live this fully? Valencia heard the silence in my voice when I described it. "You're not asking whether you can buy it," she said. "You're asking whether you deserve it." She was right. And the answer, finally, was yes. So I bought it. Meanwhile, Jesseline and Rafferty had discovered enough to realize I had money. Not the full picture, perhaps, but enough to understand that their story about me no longer made sense. Jesseline called after the Port Harville Herald published a photo of me at the auction. "Care to explain how you spent $100,000 on old maps?" she demanded. "Good morning to you too. Where did that money come from?" "My finances are not your concern. I'm your daughter." You remembered that very late. She went quiet. Then she said, "Were you hiding money from me?" "No," I said. "I was protecting myself from people who had already shown me what they would do if they thought I had nothing." I hung up before she could answer. But they did not stop. Rafferty appeared in the lobby of the Crimson Tide Hotel, telling the manager he was worried about my mental state and spending habits. The hotel refused to give him information, but Valencia understood exactly what was happening. They may try to build a guardianship argument, she warned. Claim you're unstable, reckless, incapable of managing your own affairs. I felt sick. They can do that? They can try, she said. Your defense is documentation, medical clarity, financial planning, and public credibility. So that became the plan. The museum wanted to announce the collaboration. Blackburns offered to host a reception. Professors, donors, artists, and local leaders would attend. A room full of credible witnesses. A room where Jesseline and Rafferty's version of me would quietly collapse under the weight of reality. Then a letter arrived under my hotel room door from a doctor I had never met, expressing concern about behavioral and financial irregularities reportedly described by family members. Valencia was furious. She responded through legal channels and copied the state medical board. The doctor backed away quickly, but the message was clear. My daughter was willing to question my mind to get near my money. That truth hurt more than losing the house ever could. On the evening of the reception, I wore an emerald silk gown and my pearl necklace. I looked in the mirror for a long time. The woman staring back was not transformed by money. Money had only removed the fear. The real transformation had begun the moment I stopped accepting other people's version of me. Blackburns glowed that night. Glass cases displayed maritime artifacts. Enlarged reproductions of Winthrop's charts lined the walls. My botanical illustrations, old and new, were framed with elegant restraint. People came to me with questions, respect, excitement. Dr. Eleanor Boss, the museum director, spoke about the importance of pairing historical coastline records with modern botanical art. Professor Harriet Montgomery from West Home University told me my work had been used in conservation coursework for years. I stood among them, not as someone's burden, not as someone's mother, not as an old woman to be managed, as myself. Then Jesseline, Rafferty, and Octavia walked in uninvited. Imogen leaned toward me. Should I have security remove them? I looked at my daughter. She already seemed uncomfortable. Rafferty looked furious. Octavia wore that same polished concern. No, I said. Let them stay. Jesseline approached with a tight smile. Mother, how lovely to see you. Jesseline, I said. I didn't know you had an interest in maritime history. Dr. Boss smiled kindly. You must be very proud. Your mother's work is an invaluable record of coastal ecological change. Jesseline's smile trembled. Of course, though her sudden reemergence has surprised us. She seemed content in retirement until recently. There it was. Subtle, poisonous, public. Before I could answer, Dr. Wilford said, Artists rarely retire in the ordinary sense. Mrs. Thornwick has shown remarkable clarity and vision throughout this project. Unquote. I saw Rafferty's jaw clench. Then Imogen tapped her glass and introduced the collaboration. She spoke of Winthrop's charts, the museum loan, and the exhibition built around my new botanical series. Applause filled the room. Then I was invited to speak. I stepped forward without notes. I spoke about coastlines, memory, plants, history, and the strange patience of nature. I spoke about how some things survive storms, not because they are hard, but because they know how to root deeply. When I finished, the applause was warm and full. Rafferty approached afterward with a tight smile. I'm afraid my mother-in-law may be taking on too much, he told Professor Montgomery. Given recent strain, we advise against unnecessary stress. I turned to him slowly. Rafferty, I don't recall appointing you as my assistant or my medical advisor. Then I looked at the professor. I would be delighted to discuss the lecture series. Octavia stepped in. Sudden wealth can be disorienting, Teresa. We only care about your well-being. How interesting, I said. My own physician of 15 years says I am in excellent health. Unlike the doctor you contacted who had never examined me. Octavia went still. That was the moment she knew I had documentation. Later, Jessalyn cornered me near the display of my orchid plates. "You planned all of this," she whispered. "The lawyers, the museum, the interviews, tonight. You made yourself look stable before we could raise concerns." I looked at her for a long time. "If by concerns you mean trying to control my property, my choices, and my money, then yes, I was strategic." Her eyes filled with something I could not name. "We've never seen this side of you." "No," I said. "You never asked who I was. You only cared what I could provide." "That's not fair. When did you ask about my work, my ideas, my dreams, my grief, my plans? When did I become a person to you, Jessalyn, instead of a function?" She had no answer. Rafferty came up and took her arm. "We're leaving." Jessalyn looked at me one last time. "This isn't over." "It can be," I said. "Or it can become something else, if you ever learn to see me as a person." For a second, I thought I saw doubt in her face. Then Rafferty pulled her away. I watched them go. And for the first time, I did not follow. The rest of the evening unfolded in warmth. The museum secured donors. The university wanted educational materials. Collectors asked what I planned to paint next. Imogen and Doctor. Boss spoke excitedly about the exhibition schedule. By the end of the night, I was exhausted in the best way. Not from fighting, from living. A few weeks later, Jessalyn and Rafferty left my old house. Not gracefully, but legally. Valencia made sure my paintings were recovered. The stolen pieces returned to me with only minor damage, and the storage company provided records that helped document everything. I did not sell the Victorian right away. I walked through it once after they were gone. The house felt bruised, but it also felt peaceful. In the upstairs study, the one Rafferty had taken over, I stood in the dust and remembered painting there while Jessalyn slept as a child. I remembered Michael bringing me tea. I remembered every winter I had survived, every bill I had paid, every version of myself I had buried beneath duty. Then I locked the door and drove to Lighthouse Point. My new home stood above the sea, bright with late afternoon light. The studio smelled of fresh wood and salt air. My brushes waited on the work table. The Winthrop charts were being prepared for museum display. My first new coastal painting in years rested half-finished beneath the window. I was 63 years old. I had been betrayed. I had been underestimated. I had been nearly pushed out of my own life by the person I loved most. But I was not finished. Not even close. That is what Jessalyn never understood. You can spend years making yourself smaller for the people you love. You can call it peace. You can call it sacrifice. You can even call it motherhood. But one day, if you are lucky, life will hand you a door. And when it opens, you have to be brave enough to walk through it. Not angry. Not bitter. Just awake. So when people ask me what the lottery changed, I tell them the truth. It did not make me valuable. I was already valuable. It simply gave me enough room to remember. And hey guys, if you made it all the way to the end of Teresa's story, thank you so much for listening. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and tell me whether you think Teresa handled her daughter the right way. Sometimes the hardest part of starting over is admitting that the people closest to us may not deserve access to the life we worked so hard to build. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember your story is not over just because someone else tried to write the ending. Thanks for watching, guys. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next story.